All right, hello everyone. This is Learn Together Filmmaking. I'm John Martinez. Today we're going to be talking about how to make this landscape right here, this mountain with some lakes in it. And this is entirely procedural. We have adjust the size of your landscape, do lots of different things, move around. You can change what level the water is at down here. Add some rocks scattered around the terrain and these little shrubs right here around the water level. So let's go ahead and open up a new file so that we can see what exactly is going on here. So first we are going to just go ahead and delete everything. Add in a plane. Then we're going to come over to geometry nodes. So we have this plane right here. We're going to create a new geometry node set right here. We have the group input, group output. That's where everything's going. We're actually not going to use the plane that we created. We're going to use a grid. That's going to be the base for everything that's going on here. So for this group input, we're actually going to create some new inputs here so that we can adjust everything procedurally. This first one, we're going to rename this and call this the ground size. We're going to set this to a float number, which it already is. Next one we're going to call the ground resolution. In other words, that way we can adjust how fine the details are in the setting that we have. The resolution is going to have to be an integer number because that's going to control the number of vertices within our grid right now. Right now we can make it a really big grid. Let's adjust the set it over to wire view mode. As you see, we can right now adjust both of these right here, but we want to have it set up so that we can take our resolution, then have a single input over here so we can control everything. And that's going to be important when we start having the water and all of that stuff in here, so we don't have to find a whole bunch of things to adjust. Ground size, again, we can just put that in here. This way we can adjust the size with one slider value in the sidebar, adjust the resolution. That's where we'll start with that. And then right now we'll go ahead and create all of the inputs that we need. The water level input right there, that's going to be, again, a float value. The water resolution, this is going to be optional, depending on if you want to have the resolution of the water be the exact same as the ground resolution. You may want to change the water so that it's a different resolution just to save on memory, because when you get up to very high resolution, this can get very memory intensive. Then we're going to have a rock resolution here as well. That one is going to be also an integer. All right, so that gets us set up with kind of our initial settings here for our group input, and we can now start actually building the mountains. So right now we have this plane and all of the points are going to be on this flat area. And what we want to do in order to make these mountains is to start moving the planes in random directions up and down specifically. We don't want to start moving them sideways or anything, just along the z-axis. So the way we can do that is we will take a set position. Just put that in between both of those right there. Then we are going to take a combine XYZ, a separate XYZ, and the position attribute node. Then we're going to connect it to here, connect the X and Y across there, take our position, and nothing changes. So basically what's happening right now is this little setup right here is saying for each point on this plane, we're going to take the position of that point and we're just going to pass it through and into the set position. So in other words, nothing is going to change along the X and Y axis. We're just saying what is its position, that it's its current position. And the way we get the variation in the Z position is we take a noise texture and connect that to the Z. And now you can see we start getting a little bit of variation in the Z direction for everything. But whatever we change, let's go ahead and change this to 4D so that we can, essentially it's a seed value. If we change it to 4D, this W changes that. What we want though, as you can see, we can change the scale of this, and that changes how big the noise patterns are. If we make it really, really small, there's not very much going on there. We can start to get like that. But what we can't change like this is the strength of it. What we want to do is change how tall the noise is. So the way we can do that is by taking a math node and then multiplying that by some value. So for example, we can take it like this, and the node or the noise starts getting a lot. You can start getting really big bumps like this, but unfortunately in doing so, when we do that, what it's actually doing is also moving the entire thing upwards, which we don't want. So the solution for that is just take another math node, a divide, then we take this value that we have here, divide that by 2 specifically, and then we can subtract that from what we have the noise texture. And then by changing that, we can change the amount of noise, but it stays centered exactly around the Z value of 0. Let's go ahead and change our resolution to maybe 25 just so we can get a general pattern of what's going on. Now we can change our noise value to be whatever we feel works really good. For the exact value that I chose for the final product, so we'll go ahead and change our resolution to 100 just so we can get some good detail here. We will use a, say, 34 to make it a big setting so that we can see what exactly is going on in here. If you adjust the detail, you can see that let's go back over to solid view. Go 250 for that. All right. So if you adjust the detail, you can see that the terrain starts getting a lot of, well, detail in it. So I just cranked the detail all the way up, and roughness, that's pretty good as is. If you change it again, you can see it starts, you get rid of all the roughness, it gets rid of all the detail. You start adding that in, just dial in the value that you like. The particular one I chose is that right there. And then I chose to add just a little bit of distortion in it just to give it a bit more randomness in there. It's up to your personal preference. So this basically kind of gets us the basic terrain right here. So then if we can start working on the water level right now. So I'll go ahead and take our group output, move it really far away because the water is going to take up a big chunk of our space. So water it basically is just going to be a flat surface at some predetermined level height-wise within our grid. Just use another grid. It's a lot simpler when you do it like that. Ground size, you set it to the same, or you use the same input for the ground size. And then you can use the water resolution for this right here, for the resolution of your grid. And we'll go ahead and add a join geometry in here so you can see what it is I'm doing. We got water in here now. Problem is, right now as it is, our water level does absolutely nothing for us. So again, we can just use a set position, put that in there. We will take our, we have our set position, then we will take a separate and combine XYZ along with another position right there, and take our water level into the Z. And from there we can move the water level up and down. You can animate this value and create, say, a flooding plane or something along those lines. I wanted to have, like, say, a waviness texture in the water. If you want to have a perfectly smooth water surface, you can leave it at this and you're done with regards to the water. But if you want to add a little bit more detail, because I will be rendering this in cycles, if you want to have more detail in the water and get some ripples in the water, you might be able to do that with in the shader editor for the water. Use the normal map and it's a noise texture there. But if you want to have it actually within the geometry itself, this is how I did that. Use another set position, combine XYZ. If you take set position and put it into the offset with 0 value all the way around, nothing changes because you're telling it to change the values by absolutely nothing. So then you can take another noise texture, put that in here, put the factor in there, and you start getting, let's bump up the resolution so you can actually see what is going on. Now you see we're getting some really big ripples in here, and we don't necessarily want that. So we're going to take a map range, plug that in there, 0.001 and negative 0.001. So what that, it's really hard to tell in this view, really any view, I guess. It's hard to tell where the water is actually distorting, because what we've done is we've made the value, the range, we've taken this 0 to 1 noise texture and remapped it from 0 to 1 into negative 0.001 to positive 0.001. If you bypass this map range, it makes it all noisy and everything, but we want very subtle noise or very subtle ripples in here, so we're just going to leave it as is. Stuff going on here. Again, it doesn't look so great right now. You bump up the ground resolution. That's going to be what gives you all the details that makes it look ultra realistic. Let's bump this up to 500 just so you're starting to see a little bit of detail within the rocks themselves. And of course, the more you bump up the resolution, the laggier it's going to get. So I like to, when I'm doing all my work, just keep it a little bit lower so I can still see the general shape, but not be bogged down by the fact that I'm millions and millions of polygons. All right, so we've done that. Let's say we want to add some rocks in there. You could, of course, use models or something like that. What I'm going to do, though, is use points. We are going to, say, take our original geometry, just the landscape itself, the terrain, distribute points along those faces. So what do? We have this right here with a bunch of points all over the faces of this. Change the density of that by using add some random values in here, because after all, if you have this terrain, let's put the water back in there. With all this water, your rocks are not going to be scattered equally across this entire terrain. You're going to have clusters of rocks here, some over there, some spaces with very little rocks, or very few rocks. And if you take this distribute points on faces, it's quite homogeneous. It's very evenly distributed throughout. So what we want to do is take this even distribution and add a little bit of noise to this. So we're going to say, let's just go ahead and do it. I will just show you what it is, because my ability to describe things is not great. That reminds me, I need to actually make an input for rock density so that we can actually control that here. So we're going to call this one rock density. That we can change to a a float value. Take our rock density, plug that in there, and nothing happens because our density is none. So as you can see, now we're starting to distribute these points on here with this value, but they're not so evenly distributed, not as much as before. And we can change that even farther by taking our color ramp and bringing it in just a little bit. And that allows us to add more contrast. So make the spots with rocks have more rocks, and make the spots without rocks be bigger as well. You can just bump that in there. And by doing that, you can now start to see the rocks are a little bit more clumpy than they were before. And to increase the clumpiness of that, boom, look at that. Now they're a little bit too clumpy. So we can spread it out just a wee bit, like so, and then bump down the density until you find something that looks, a natural distribution here. So you've done that. You now have a bunch of points all over our geometry right here. top of that geometry, we have a bunch of points. So now you can see here is our terrain with a bunch of points distributed all over it, but these points are not rocks. So we are going to take an instance on points. And what that's going to do is it's going to take where every point is that we have currently, we're going to create an instance on top of that. And now we have a bunch of icospheres everywhere, which let's scale those down just a wee bit. A lot of icospheres. Everywhere that there was a point before, there is now an icosphere. And let's use this rock resolution. That's just going to be the number of subdivisions, because right now we don't want these to be perfect spheres. In fact, it'd actually be better if we just have really low resolution things, so they're more chunky that way. And when you're viewing it at a distance, if they are sufficiently small enough and in great enough number, they're going to look more like rocks. So let's take our resolution, just bump that in here. And right now the rocks are all the same size. We don't want that. So we are going to, again, add more noise. In case you haven't noticed, I love using noise textures to just add random variations to everything. So we can take this noise, plug it into our map range, and again, because noise gives you values from 0 to 1, and we don't really want that. Otherwise, the rocks are going to be infinitesimally small, all the way up to, just whatever size we put down in our radius. So we're going to put the radius back at 1, which makes them ridiculously huge. We're going to plug that into our scale, and then we can remap it from there to, again, negative 0.1 essentially is just 0.1, but going the other direction. And then our maximum, there we go. Now we get like a bunch of little tiny pebbles and rocks kind of showering our terrain. You can choose whatever number you want. For the density, I'll just make more or less of them. They're all facing the same direction, which we don't want. We want more noise. We just duplicate our map range, take our original noise, plug this into the rotation, and now they're all going to be little variations of rotated little rocks. And for this one, we do actually want to change the value quite a bit. So if we actually zoom in on these rocks, you can see as I do this, they all start rotating in little random directions. And the particular number you choose doesn't really matter for your map range, just so that they're not the same rotation for each of them. Each of these rocks, little icospheres, are exactly the same. Even though they're rotated differently, they're scaled differently, they are still fundamentally all the same shape, and we don't want that. We want them all to have a little bit of noise, a little bit of jaggedness to them. So the way we can do that is by using yet more noise. And this time we're going to use that as a displacement, essentially the same as though if you were using a displacement modifier over here, but this time we're doing it in geometry nodes. And the way you can do that is by realizing these instances. So right now, each of these rocks falls under this instances category. So they're all treated as one object that is all over, that one object that is distributed all over the place. Kind of like if you were using Control D to duplicate an object versus Shift D. But in this case, we don't want that. What we want to do is realize instances. So what this node does is it takes each of these rocks and says, okay, these are not all instances of one object. It's not one object that's duplicated a lot of times. Treat them all as separate objects. So you see, if we do that, we disconnect our instances from here and go through realize instances. Everything up here disappears and it's all converted into individual objects. And what that allows us to do is to deform each object individually. So if we take a set position, plug our geometry into there, take a vector math, what we can do is set the vector math to multiply, plug our normal in there. So in other words, for each one of these little rocks, you're going to have a normal which faces out from the face. It's perpendicular to the face. And this little vector node right here, or the normal node connected to the offset, essentially says take the normal and do nothing to it right now. And what we want to do is take our noise texture, get a color ramp, factor that in there, and then remap it. Actually, let's not remap it, see what happens. Take that. The reason you can connect these is because the color ramp essentially treats each of these like RGB is basically a vector. You have R, G, and B, 3 directions. You can kind of equate that to X, Y, Z. And that's important to remember is you can actually use color as vectors. So we'll take that, and now everything is chaotic now. And the reason is because, again, we are going from a 0 to a 1 value. And that is why we must use a map range. Take that in there and convert that from 0 to 1. Instead, it will be 0.01. So now everything's really small, but there's a little bit of random variation in here as well. We'll take that. You can see as I change this, they all start changing in weird little ways, having a little bit of stuff going on there. And that's where you can start, using your resolution. You can get different shapes in here. If you want to, say, bump this up a little bit, you can start getting some pretty irregular shapes in there like that. So there we go. You can get rocks on there. You have a procedural control of how much resolution or how many faces you want to have on these things, depending on the capabilities of your machine. You can control the density of your rocks, make more of them appear all over the place. Again, all of these parameters, like the scale of the noise texture, it determines where all of the rocks are going to be, where they are, all of that. You can change all of that and make them all parts of your group input if you want to make this even more procedural, more to control within this side panel, so that you can apply this to other scenes, other objects as well, and just have kind of a general node group that you can apply for anything you want to, just to quickly and easily build large complex scenes like this. Just add or remove whatever inputs you want to via this panel right here to fit your own personal needs, whatever you want there. This is already pretty good. I think we will actually go ahead and work on the materials in just a minute, or just a second. Go ahead and do that before we start adding the shrubs and everything, just so you can kind of start to see how this is all taking shape and how it's all working out. All right, so we're here looking at the textures for this landscape scenario. Right now I've already kind of got the everything set up, preset. We have one for water, ground, rocks, and shrubs, which we'll be making the shrubs in a moment. So if you notice right now we're on the water slot. Go ahead and change this, just make it a blue color. Nothing happens. Right? Change the ground, nothing happens right now. Nothing is affecting this, even though all of these materials are applied onto this landscapes object. Now, why is that? Well, that's because the geometry nodes makes it do some really weird things. So we're basically creating geometry procedurally. It doesn't know where we want to apply each of these. It doesn't know that the water is going to be this here and that the ground is going to be everything else up here. So we have to actually tell Blender which ones we want to apply all this stuff to. So we use that, we do that with a node called the set material. And what that does is that allows us to put this, say right here, we have just from this point on, we have just the landscape, just the ground mesh. We can take that, and so what we can do is actually select the ground material. It's going to be all of the terrain, we might call it. And then if we switch over here, now all of a sudden our ground material, if we change the color, that's what's actually happening on this. So we will actually go and reset that. And then we can do something similar for our water material. So now we're getting the separate material for the ground and the water. And then we will do a similar thing. We'll just take this node, bring that over there. Anyway, I'll put a shortcut key on the screen for how to get nodes outside of the frame right here. Anyways, we will select this one and set that to rocks. So now all of our rocks are going to be, let's just say this red color. So this is how we can select or set the materials for the various different objects and meshes within our scene. Right now we are in the viewport shading mode, but let's go ahead and make sure we're set on cycles, GPU compute, and switch over to cycles. Right now the world is set up with this sky texture, with our sun somewhere off in this direction. We're going to actually get rid of that and substitute that for a glass shader. The technical physically accurate value for index of reflection is actually 1.333 if you want to be physically accurate, but for my particular scene I found the 1.65 to be more visually pleasing. And we will come over to our ground material, and this is where things kind of get a little bit more complicated on this one. So right now our principal BSDF is what's going on here, but if we look at real pictures of ground and everything, it's not uniform at all. There's variations in color. So let's just go ahead and set some random green color, like maybe it's colored in or covered in dirt or grass, a little bit of grass here and there. And that looks actually pretty decent right now. And bump our ground resolution up to say 500. And hopefully that is not doesn't slow things down too much. As you can see, like in this area right here, we're getting some reflections from the sun up here, over here, but the real world is not nearly that reflective. Real dirt is not reflective like that. So let's go ahead and bump up our roughness quite a bit right now, just so we can kind of get a rougher approximation. And again, we will probably be adding some noise to all of that just to give it a little more variation in there as well. For our color, we are going to mix it a little bit. It's not going to be, right now we have it set to a grassy color, and we don't want that. We want it to have, some grass here, a little bit of dirt there. And as you can probably imagine, we are going to do that with a noise texture. In fact, we're going to be using lots of noise textures because the real world is very chaotic. How are we going to take these noise textures and change this one uniform color into some different colors, some noisy colors that are going on? Well, we're going to do that with some mix RGBs. So let's take this one. We're going to take our original green color right here. We're going to mix that with some dirt, say. So let's come up with a pretty good dirt color. Dirt's kind of brownish, so it's going to be a little orange. Something along those lines like that. Now we're going to take our noise. Let's see. Here's what the noise actually looks like on its own. Something like that. Which is all right, but we could do better. For example, my favorite method of increasing detail. Can't really see a whole lot, but if we do that, bump up the roughness, and now we're starting to see, you can see a lot of stuff going on in there, and we can make this a lot more apparent with a color ramp, and then just add in a little bit of contrast into that. Make the dark parts dark, make the light parts light. Something like that. And as you can see, a lot of it's going to be kind of this grayish color, and some of it's going to be black. So then we can, mess with the actual numbers and see what it all is going to look like. You can essentially treat this is basically a mask right now. You can see what parts are going to be, you know, this brownish color versus what parts are going to be green. Let's bring in the black a little bit like that. And let's go ahead and connect that onto our mix RGB and just see what that does to our color. So now you can see we're getting a little bit of, you know, something's going on here. We're getting a little bit of variation in here. And this is where we're going to have to start being a little bit, thinking about what other sorts of things are being mixed in here with everything. So we have a little bit of dirt color in here and a little bit of green. Let's bump up the saturation. This we're going to start, you know, tweaking values, figuring out what you do and don't like. So let's go ahead and start messing with this second one as well. It's going to have very similar to the other one, and we're going to use another mix RGB. And what are we doing here? Well, we are actually going to be adding a little bit of noise into the, sorry, look at my notes. Let's just add it in there. You'll see when I get it on there. So we'll take this dirt and we're actually going to put that on the second color. We are going to be mixing this with a much lighter dirt color. No different dirt colors in here as well, and start seeing something like that. That's true. We should save. That's actually very important. We will call this landscape tutorial. Should probably have saved a long time ago, but it is what it is. All right, so we're back. In the meantime, after the program crashed, I took the time to figure out what was going all weird up here. I just needed to change the Z scale along here. It looks a lot better. Don't ask me why it's negative. It just is. Also adjusted the colors a little bit as well. It's just something you're going to have to kind of figure out looking at it based on the lighting that you have in there. And speaking of lighting, the world lighting that I had here, this is why lighting is so important. Everything looked so awful because the background strength was set at 1. So pull that down to, you know, not -0.1, you know, something like that. The look that I'm going for here is like a nice sunsetty type look like that. Also change the settings over here as well. Increase the ozone from the default value, just gives the sky a nice bluer color. Increase the altitude, because this is, after all, a mountain. Mountains are usually high up into the atmosphere. So what that actually does is it kind of just basically changes. It's hard to see. You can kind of see that, like the horizon line around here. By changing that, you can kind of see what it does to all of that. Figure out what works for you. For me, you know, I'm doing a mountain, high elevation. I didn't like the dust in the air either. You know, like that versus that. It's subtle. Just play with the values. Find what you do and don't like. Anyways, back to making the ground. These are, if you want to look at the values, that's for that. There are the values for that color and the values for the dark color. Things that are wet, that is the rocks that are going to be immediately above the water, that's touching the water and everything, those are going to be a little bit different. They're going to have a bit of a darker color. They're going to be shinier, for one thing. Water makes things shiny, and that is where this gradient texture comes in. So two things that we have to do. The surface, everything below the water and just a little bit above the water, it's going to have to be darker because water makes rocks dark. And it's also going to be shinier. It's going to have a lower roughness. That's very important to kind of help sell this realism thing that we're going for here. If we just take the vector as default, it's going to go from negative, or from 0 to 1, left to right, like, or right to left, front to back, whatever you call that. So that's why we take this mapping, and if we do that, absolutely nothing changes for us. So the way we do that is we can take, let's get a color ramp in here just so we can, it's easier to see. So it's basically going from 0 here to 1 over here. What we want to do is actually rotate that right now, because if we look at it from the side like this, it's going to be easier to see. It goes from left to right like that. But if we start rotating it along the y-axis, then we can actually see how you might find the level of the water. The water is going to be flat, so we would like our gradient, where we're going to select. This is, again, we're using this as essentially a masking tool, and we would like the water to be, or the gradient, the selection of the gradient to be where the water is, and we can affect how that is by bringing this in. That also allows us to get this smooth transition, because wherever the water is, we would like the gradient to be, like, the black part just stop right where the water is, and then from there to gradually fade back in to the regular rock that we have up here. So how are we going to do that? Let's go back over here. And this is another thing, you know, you're going to play with the seed value of the noise, and that's going to change the whole shape of your mountains and everything. You're just going to find a particular view that looks good to you and what works for you and everything. So anyways, we will take a mix node, and we're going to take our original, our original color and everything. It looks good right now. It looks pretty good. And what we're going to do from here is we're going to add in this darkened material at the surface of the water and below the water. And we're going to do that by mixing in another color, but that color is going to be, we're just going to use black. Right now, if you mix it all the way to 0, nothing happens. If you mix it all the way, it just turns it black. But what we want to do is mix it based off of our gradient that we've established here. And we're going to find the level of that in a second. So actually, since I don't have to invert anything later, the way our gradient is set up, we would like all of the 0 values to be the stuff below all the below the water is going to be the 0 on the mask, and all of the ground is going to be 1 on the mask. So that's why we flipped it, so that color 1 is going to be our black instead of the way we had it before, like that. Because then when we applied the mask on top of that, what do we get? Well, we see that now our mask is affecting everything below this level and not anything up above. So from here is where we can actually move the mask up and down. You could do it by using not that one. I don't know, one of these. Yes. You can affect it by moving it, up here like that. But I personally think it's easier just to do it from here. You can figure out where your water level is. Unfortunately, I have not found a way. I don't know how to, say, link it to the water level so that if you change your water level, so that this will change with it. I don't know of any way to do that. If you know a way to do that, though, you can leave a comment down below and let me know, and that would be great. Share it with everyone else. If you change the water level, like animate it or something, you're going to have to animate this as well. But anyways, that takes care of the color changing portion of that, but we also want to change the roughness as well. We're going to create a new color ramp, and luckily the water level is the same, so we don't need to change that a whole lot. But what we do need to change is the value, because right now it's going to take our gradient and map it from 0 to 1. And that's going to take our roughness, and therefore also it's going to be a 0 roughness down below, and then map it to a 1 roughness up above, which if we connect it as is, it's not going to change a whole lot. But what it does, it essentially makes everything in the water completely rough, a pure mirror, and that makes all that really weird. You may want that, you may not. You can actually, and here's where the color value within here is actually going to be essentially the roughness of whatever the portion is that is selected. You can leave that really low. Basically black. And then the upper part, the rock area, right now it's all mapped to a roughness of 1, which, you know, it's not perfectly rough. In my world, in my vision that I have, it's not perfectly rough rock. It's not perfectly diffuse. There's a little bit of glossiness to it. So I'm just going to take that value. I'm going to copy it with Control C and then go over here and paste that into the value. So now this isn't mapping from 0 to 1, but rather from 0 to 0.9 or 892. So then when we connect it over here, the upper portion up here doesn't change at all from what we've selected before. It just changes everything down below. And you can see a little bit of the rocks underneath. They're a little bit reflective. And that's going to be kind of accurate. That's where you start getting into like the details within the water, within the water. It's changing how the water behaves on top of all of that. We'll get back to that in a second. For now, though, we can add a little bit more detail to the rocks up above through use of a bump node. So we take that, we plug that into the normal, and boom, you can pull down the effect, not to 0. Just add a little bit of spice to this. And this is essentially our rock material, or our land material, actually. Let's go over to our actual rocks. And what are we going to do there? Well, these rocks, they're tiny. So we can take our rocks and just add a basic color to them. In fact, I'm just going to actually borrow let's say the lighter color from and now they blend in a little bit more. We're going to increase the roughness quite a bit because, again, these rocks are not shiny. They may be. Maybe your rocks are shiny. So we have all that, and that's really all you need to do. I mean, they look like rocks now. Let's go back to this water over here. So let's just add a little bit of, find what works for you. Depending on the waviness of the water that you're going to be using, this may be more or less like that. So if you decide not to go with any waves, you want it to be perfectly smooth water at an isolated lake way up in the Himalayas or whatever, you can leave it perfectly smooth. Or if you're going to have really big waves, you might choose a high value like actually that kind of looks a little bit like it's frozen or something. So maybe you can add a little bit of snow to your mountains up here, and then you get a frozen lake here. For me, I like something a little bit more subtle, not perfectly smooth. That looks good to me. But I want to see the actual terrain itself. The mountain itself has texture in the water. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a mix shader and a transparent BSDF. And what that's going to allow us to do is from here, we can decide, we want to see just, our glassy water all the way down to the water is invisible somehow. And so we just find whatever look you like. This will determine how much of the terrain down below you can actually see. So now, you have this water, you can see into the water. And there we go. That's a very simple water. So now we have a pretty good terrain here. But what is it lacking? It is lacking a couple of things. We have all this grass and stuff growing all over, but grass is not the only thing that grows. We can have, say, some shrubbery. Let's say it's going to grow around the water because bigger plants need more water, so they're not going to grow way up here in the peaks or off into the distance where there's no water available to them. So that is where we're going to go back to our geometry nodes from a distance. Like, let's say we're going to have them all in like this area around here. I want them hanging out around the water, but only over here. So to do that, we're going to have to, again, distribute some individual particles and stuff along. So we're going to distribute some points on faces. What does that look like? Again, you have a whole bunch of points right here. But what we want to do is restrict it only to this portion down here. And how are we going to do that? Well, we are going to use selection, this little selection right here. We have no geometry, therefore there is no proximity to anything. So a selection gives us absolutely nothing. The way you can resolve that is by adding any object, plane, monkey, Suzanne, anything like that. And then we will take this object info node, we'll take our cube, and lo and behold, everything comes back. Basically what you need to know is that this maximum right here essentially just controls the range. And what this allows us to do, actually first I need to set this to relative, or else if we leave it on original, then if I move the cube, our selection doesn't change. So we need to set that to relative. Then as we move the cube, our selection moves with it. So that's very important for us, because now we can, let's first of all connect this to our join geometry. We said we wanted all of our plants to kind of be in this vague area over here. So we're going to take our cube, we are going to move it somewhere around there. Let's move it down below. And we'll go ahead and hide it, because now we don't need to see it. We can see where all of our points are right there. And if we want them to be farther away, spread out over the terrain a little bit more, and just adjust this value right here like that. So we need to take these points and create some sort of shrubbery that we then put on top of it. So let's create ourselves a star. We want to take this star and deform it using, you guessed it, a noise texture. Let's add a set position, because this again will allow us to take our geometry, and then by using it in an offset, we can create some random noise here. We're going to be grouping all this stuff together, and we want to have some sort of control out here in the main area. It's a very chaotic mess. It's just a line though. If we try and again render that, it's not going to render as anything, because a line does not have any thickness to it. In order to convert this line, we are going to take our curve and turn that into a mesh. And then we can add a profile curve. And this is important. It has to be a curve circle rather than, say, a mesh circle. So you put a curved circle to it and it looks absolutely atrocious. Let's try 0.1. And now you can see it is starting to have, it actually has a shape to it now. Our resolution, we absolutely do not need a whole lot, because again, we're going to be looking at it from a distance of like this, where it's going to be basically invisible. It just needs to be a little chaotic bundle of mess over there. Actually, you don't need any of these right here, because now you have all of your controls right here on the outside, and we can change all of our numbers that we want to from here. So now that we have our shrubbery, and we have our points that we have distributed along our surface here, we can now use these shrubs as instances to instance on points. Nothing happens when we do that because we do not have a mesh, and now we do, and the mesh is horrifyingly huge. It turns into a giant spike ball, which is when we again use noise, because we can just adjust the scale here, and suddenly everything becomes, much tinier, like so. It's beautiful. They're all tiny little shrubberies everywhere. Let's go ahead and 1 second. delete all those, move all this up above, give ourselves some room to work with right here. Take another one of these, because right now they're all facing, oriented the same direction as well. Just attach that there and attach some really big number to it so that they're all rotated a different direction. And now that looks like shrubbery to me. You can increase the number of them. And we will now shade our shrubs. And again, like what we did with the rocks, you know, you don't need to be detailed with this. What color are shrubs? Well, it's going to be kind of greenish, a dark green. Maybe you want to make it a little bit more brownish because they are dead shrubs. And nothing changes because I did not add a set material. I'll go here, change that to a, I can't even see it. Change that to a shrubs material. Now if we do that, if we switch over to rendered view, our shrubs are beautiful. They're green. So beautiful. Our shrubs are also underwater. You can see them underwater a little bit. So we're gonna have to actually deselect all of the shrubs. So let's take a group input. We want our water level, and then take a compare floats. So take a position, compare that along the z-axis. So separate XYZ, take our position, separate XYZ, compare that to that. We have this little node group right here with the position, separate XYZ, and then a compare floats node, and then the group input where we've taken our water level that we've selected and put that into the compare, and then we put that under our selection, and it's the opposite of what we want it to be. Each point that we have created with our distribute points, every point, we're taking its position along the z-axis and then saying get rid of it if its z position is less than our water level. So everything above that we're going to keep, and we're going to instance a point onto it. This way, if we reconnect our water, unless we disconnect it, put it back, all the shrubs disappear below water and are still there above water. So now, if we look at it, ta-da! We now have beautiful shrubs. All right, we are almost done, I promise. This has gone on for way too long. I apologize for that. We have our terrain. The terrain, everything, rocks, ground, water, it all looks pretty good. But the sky is very plain, and we're using a sky texture. You could use an HDRI. If you're using an HDRI, then, well, I imagine you're probably done right about now. Just make your HDRI look good, select a camera position. In fact, let's add a camera right now. Where's my camera? There it is. So we'll go ahead and find a view you like. You know, this is the view something like what I chose before. We will align view, align active camera to view. And then we can change our focal length and move the camera around wherever you want to. You know, something like that. I think it's a good view. Let's see what it looks like if we bump our resolution up. I think this is a pretty good looking view right here. We got a little bit of foreground action. You know, you may want to mess with the settings on the rocks a little bit to get all that. Add some clouds to this, add in the background, just kind of sell it a little bit. So what we're going to do in order to do that, we're going to add a cube. Add a material, call it clouds, and remove our surface nodes because we're going to be using a volume. Go ahead and add a principled volume in here. And let's hide our ground and our little domain here. Go to shading. We have a volume. As you can see, it has a certain behavior to it. What we want to do then is create noise. As always, it's noise texture. Some texture coordinates. Node Wrangler add-on, Control T. It's in Blender. You just have to enable it. So let's add some noise. What does this noise look like? That is what it looks like. That's not very cloud-like to me, so let's add a color ramp. We don't want it to be quite so splotchy, you know? Let's add a little bit of detail to it, because clouds have a little bit of stuff going on. The roughness right there. And then what the important thing is going to be to scale it. You have to find a value that works for you. The white parts, or the gray parts, those are going to be where the clouds actually are. All of the black parts, that's going to be just, you know, plain empty sky. So you have to find, you know, some combination of settings that works for you. You know, that looks pretty decent to me. Bump our density down to 0. There we go. That looks a lot better. So those are clouds. You can use, you can put it into the density. You might have to play with it a bit more, but since the clouds are basically white and they're going to be really uniform in terms of, like, you know, the intensity and everything, you can just do it as an emission, because they're not going to have to, like, you know, reflect light and scatter it in really complex ways. You're not going to see rays of light going through there. So it looks like a pretty good clouds to me. And what can really help sell this is if you add clouds casting shadows onto your terrain as well. So we're going to do something similar. Actually, let's just take this cloud right here. We're going to duplicate it, and we are going to move it, you know, somewhere around here like this. Because if you remember, our sun is coming from off over in this direction, you know, right over there. I think that's the sun. It's just a little circle. I'm assuming that's what the sun is. So what we want is for these clouds to get basically, you know, somewhere in between our sun and everything. We'll take this, you know, this for this one right here. We'll take this one and let's create a new material using this. You just click that button, it creates a new material. We'll call this shadow clouds. And this time we will actually have to use the density portion right there, because it won't be casting shadow otherwise. And the thing with this, for the shadow casting clouds, you can go a lot more dense with it than you could with the other one, because you're not seeing it. The only thing you're seeing is the effect it has on your terrain. There we go. You can see it starting to actually do things here. Let's get rid of that. You know, we want to make it real contrasty. You know, you get a little bit of variation in there. It's subtle, but it just helps sell it a little bit in combination with the background clouds, with that. You know, I think it looks all right. It's not half bad. Play with the values. Let's bump this up quite a bit. Hope it doesn't crash. Yeah, I'm gonna bump up the resolution to 4000. That's what it looks like. That's our terrain. And let's see what this looks like. See if it crashes. Give it a second. It's updating all of our stuff up there. There we go. It's beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, you can add a little bit of waves in the water. I think I would make our water a little bit bumpier. I'd probably move the camera so that this little icosphere here in the corner would not be so prominent. From a distance, they look all right. From right up next to you, they're obviously triangles. Anyways, so this is the real goodbye. I've been me, you've been you. Bye.